Our first reader, Cynthia Schreiner Smith. Cynthia is co-owner of CyBick Creative, a video production company she owns with her husband, Bick Smith. She is most proud of their history film, Gangsterland, a documentary-style movie about the 1930s gangsters in St. Paul. She has also worked at the Wabasha Street Caves since 1998. We have a reading happening there soon, where her work as an historical tour guide complements her love of writing, history, and of course, St. Paul. Please welcome Cynthia Schreiner Smith.
Thank you. Yes, I am so proud of that movie, I wore my t-shirt. Wow. I know. I thought, they said I could read whatever I wanted to in my 10 minutes, and I said, well, my favorite thing I've written is that movie, but it's hard to read a movie. So I wore the t-shirt, and I'll let you know it's going to be on public television in October, and you can watch it then. So I thought with my 10 minutes, I would read one of my stories from the Almanac, and then another story from a previous Almanac. And I do like history in St. Paul, so my first book, first story I should say, is an historical piece I wrote called What St. Paul Owes to Whiskey. During an 1883 visit to St. Paul, the great Mark Twain observed, "How solemn and beautiful is the thought that the earliest pioneer of civilization, the van leader of civilization, is never the steamboat, never the railroad, never the newspaper, never the Sabbath school, never the missionary, but always whiskey." Such is the case. And Mr. Twain was right. Such is the case with St. Paul, which grew up around a wild and woolly little tavern known as Pig's Eye Pandemonium. The tavern keeper was Pierre Pig's Eye Perrault, a cantankerous old French-Canadian fur trader of dubious morals and character, whose favorite hobby seemed to be keeping the soldiers at Fort Snelling as drunk as possible. Perrault had one squinty blind eye surrounded by a pinkish color, giving a piggish expression to his sodden, low features. So they took to calling him Pig's Eye. Perrault and other squatters had been living within Fort Snelling, but the commander, Major Joseph Plimpton, got so fed up with this motley bunch that he kicked them out. Twice. The second time, Plimpton burned their houses down just to demonstrate that he was serious. Undeterred, Pig's Eye set up his whiskey still just outside the fort on the banks of the Mississippi, in what is now the lower town area of St. Paul. In 1837, the whiskey bottles were uncorked in Pig's Eye Pandemonium, and the wild little town that would become the city of St. Paul was accidentally born. Since the town had not actually been planned, no one bothered to name it. But Pierre Perrault was very infamous up and down the mighty Mississippi, and the town soon became known as Pig's Eye Landing. A few years later, Father Lucien Gaultier came to town to build its first church. In his dedication speech, he implored the young city to change its colorful but dubious moniker. And so the town was renamed in honor of a more respectable establishment, Father Gaultier's church, St. Paul the Apostle. James Goodhue, St. Paul's first newspaper editor, declared, "Pig's Eye, converted thou shalt be like Saul. Arise, and henceforth, St. Paul." Perhaps Mr. Goodhue was relieved he didn't have to name his newspaper the Pig's Eye Pioneer Press. As Mr. Twain stated, St. Paul was founded on the power of whiskey, but its status as political center was nearly lost until once again whiskey and a wily Frenchman came into the picture. St. Paul had been the capital of the territory, but some wanted it moved elsewhere when Minnesota became a state. Territorial Governor Willis Borman especially hated St. Paul due to political disagreements and a bit of greed. He was determined to make the capital St. Peter, where he happened to own a lot of land. Governor Gorman nearly got his way. In 1857, the territorial legislature passed a bill making St. Peter the new capital. But the governor had not counted on Representative Jolly Joe Roulette, another colorful French fur trader who happened to love St. Paul. And he also happened to be the lawmaker in charge of bringing that bill to the governor to sign. Instead, Jolly Joe and the bill disappeared. Legend says Joe snuck into a local hotel where he partied for days, eating fine foods and getting rip-roaring drunk. By the time he emerged, the legislative session was over, and it was too late for the governor to sign the bill. Not wanting to wait 2 more years for the next session, Minnesota accepted statehood in 1858, and St. Paul became the capital by default. So the next time you're in St. Paul enjoying a fine drink, raise a toast to two colorful Frenchmen and the power of whiskey.
All right.
So rather than read the second story I have in that book, I thought it would be more fun to go back and read the one that I had in 2012, which also calls upon Mr. Pig's Eye. And maybe you have noticed in St. Paul, if you're looking at a map, there is an island in the Mississippi River called Pig's Eye Island. And the story was called Pig's Eye Island Adventure. When I was growing up near Mounds Park during the 50s and 60s, fresh milk was delivered to our stoop like clockwork. However, no one came to haul away the refuse. A big rusty metal drum in our backyard received the trash instead. When it got full, my father lit it on fire. Items you couldn't burn, bottles, cans, old plastic toys, were driven to the Pig's Eye Island city dump. My brother almost always got to go with Dad to the dump, a fact that he lorded over his little sisters. But sometimes we got to go too. Dad would throw the trash in the trunk of his Chevy and we'd fly down steep Warner Road toward the Mississippi River. At the bottom of the hill, he'd take a hairpin left turn onto the gravel road that led to Pig's Eye Island and the dump. My father paid 50 cents at the gate for the privilege of adding to the mountain of trash. Afterward, we'd continue farther onto the island to visit the farm of my Uncle Mickey. We called him Uncle Bum Bum because he lived on an island called Pig's Eye, beyond the dump, past the municipal sewage treatment plant, and across many railroad tracks with boxcars hiding hobos. I remember one visit when all three of us kids were in the car. As we passed the sewage treatment plant, we somehow convinced Dad to stop and see if we could take a peek inside. Being young children, we were fascinated by all things pertaining to toilets. I'm sure the man inside was surprised to see our little family asking for a tour. Most people had no interest in the graphic details of disposing of bathroom waste. Receiving a warm invitation to come inside, we were met by an enthralling maze of pipes, vats, and spigots, and an unpleasant odor. The worker kept up a running pattern of mesmerizing facts regarding St. Paul's sewage system. Eventually, we were led into a huge room with a gigantic open pool that glistened a beautiful golden yellow. It took us a moment to figure out what it was. My brother gleefully threatened to dunk his little sisters in it. We screamed with appropriate giggling and fear. The tour ended with a trip to the office, where the man kept a strange collection in a little glass case. He saved unusual items that people accidentally flushed down the biffy. Most commonly, coins, rings, and false teeth. The most interesting thing was a glass eye. The thought of some poor person's eyeball popping out and flushing away horrified and delighted us all at once. At home, we breathlessly told our mother about our exciting trip to the Pig's Eye sewage treatment plant. Mom just shook her head, giving Dad that "what were you thinking" look. But all she said was, "Sounds wonderful, kids. I hope you remembered to thank the nice man." Aghast, I realized I had not. I felt horrible the rest of the night. He had been so nice, so proud of his unappreciated job. Lying in bed, I fretted and fretted, thinking about the nice man and his collection of flushed items. Suddenly, inspiration hit. I jumped out of bed, wrote him a neatly printed thank you note, carried it to the bathroom, and flushed it. Confident he would get my note in the morning, I fell blissfully asleep. Thank you.